But let's go across to Vishnu now for more on the bilateral with the US President Joe Biden and what we can expect there. In fact, Vishnu, already there's the US NSA Jake Sullivan has spoken on it and some of the outcomes that they're looking for. If you could take us through those details.
That's right, Gargi. So let's just talk about this point by point. As you mentioned, the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan making it clear in a press gaggle ahead of the arrival of the U.S. President Joe Biden to India that there were several key deals which they expected to close out. Remember, many of these deals had been spoken about and found mention in the joint agreement between India and the United States when the Prime Minister was in Washington. But specifically speaking, the deal for jet engines in India is something that America is looking to close out. These would be General Electric engines and would be used to power the light combat aircraft Tejas Mark 1A. This is key technology that India has been seeking for a long time. If it is manufactured by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited over here in India, it gives us a leg up for our future aerospace projects. So that's certainly one very key takeaway that we are looking for. The other big deal that America wants to close out as well, whether there'll be progress this time around or not, is the deal for MQ-9A or MQ-9B Predator drones manufactured by the American company General Atomics. This is a multi-billion-dollar deal. It's technology that the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy are looking for very closely to monitor the frontier with China, with Pakistan, but also our maritime areas very closely. There was mention of this in that joint statement in the US. President Biden very keen, the United States very keen to close out that deal. There's mention in that press gaggle by Mr. Sullivan of 5G and 6G technology, emerging technology issues, areas as being something that America would like to look at very, very closely indeed. So in terms of bilaterals, I think those are the key issues that America is looking to close out. Remember, the Prime Minister will be meeting Joe Biden, the US President, at his residence.
Right, Vishnu, also on the issue of, this Delhi declaration, that too was asked whether there will be some sort of, joint statement to that. Jake Sullivan, didn't really answer much. He also said something to the effect of, that the US feels that Zelensky having a role at the G20 would be something they would welcome. So this is one of the, challenges ahead for India as, where the G20 summit is going to take place. There's still no, consensus on that Delhi declaration.
I think there are a couple of important points that the U.S. National Security Advisor mentioned. Firstly, as far as that joint declaration is concerned, yes, the issue of Ukraine is something which has prevented a joint declaration at earlier ministerial meets associated with the G20 process. However, the U.S. is still optimistic, but they did point out that they are concerned about China potentially blocking a joint declaration over the issue of climate and climate change. What Mr. Sullivan said, and I quote, is, I think the idea of holding climate hostage to a particular country's priority on some totally separate issue is not the height of responsibility. He's talking about China and China's reported objections to certain language used in elements of the climate change agreement that they're looking to get. That would apparently form an important part of the Delhi declaration itself if it were to go on. But on the larger issue on whether the US is okay with a joint declaration or a Delhi declaration, as it were, he said, look, yes, absolutely. If there is a joint declaration to be had, then the United States would certainly seek it. However, this is what they want. These are the hopes. We still haven't gotten around to that final declaration yet, and it is very tough negotiations. It happened late last night, and it's been continuing.
Right, so, quite a tough, challenge for India going ahead because of the way geopolitics are right now, the US-China tensions, the US-Russia tensions, the tension over the Ukraine war as well. But one of the, big outcomes that we are looking for, which will be, a huge achievement as well, is the African Union being included in the G20, because that is something Prime Minister Modi has been pushing. Also, as many of the ministers have been talking to us in interviews leading up to the G20, they've been talking about how India has really positioned itself as the voice of the global south.
Well, there are two issues over here. One, what the World Bank has actually had to say about India's digital public infrastructure. I'll talk about that later. But let me answer your question first. India has been championing the cause of the global south very much as part of the G20 process. I did speak to the Nigerian president's spokesperson yesterday, the Tanzanian ambassador as well, and they're extremely happy that India has been pushing for this entire process. So what exactly is this going to result in? We are possibly looking at the inclusion of the African Union as part of the G20 process. years. Will that therefore become G21 or not is something we don't know. But it's the entire issue of inclusion. It is the entire issue of shared resources. It is the entire issue of someone who is willing to pay for climate change tech, reaching African nations. These are a couple of key issues that African nations are very closely looking at. They are also very impressed with India's digitalization background, what we have achieved so far. So absolutely, India, the voice of the global south, and I think you can rest assured that that will find a very significant mention in the Delhi Declaration or the joint communique, whatever the document is that finally emerges. But Gargi, I think it's also very important to refer to what I was talking about, the World Bank lauding India's progress in digital public infrastructure. And this is a new document that the World Bank has come up in. Why am I talking about this, or why are we speaking about it? Because this is something that India is looking to push very, very closely indeed. So I'm just going to run through 4 key points which the World Bank is actually referred to in that document. They've said, as far as digital infrastructure is concerned, India has achieved in 6 years what could have taken 5 decades. Secondly, the government to people payments process in India through digital means, India has built among the world's largest systems. As far as the unified payments interface is concerned, there have been more than 9.41 billion transactions in the month of May 2023. And finally, digital public infrastructure has enhanced the efficiency of private organizations. In India, it is a model which India hopes can be replicated in other parts of the world. Will there be a multilateral institution which is actually formed, which uses some of the technology that India has developed and disseminates it to various countries using their specific requirements or keeping their specific requirements in mind?